Dive into the dynamic world of high school sports. Whether you're a seasoned athletic director, a newcomer to the field, or simply curious to learn more about this exciting profession, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration, education, and a deeper understanding of the game-changing decisions that shape the world of high school athletics.
Hey everyone, welcome back to AD 360. I'm Scott Rosenberg. Greg Vandermeid, my usual partner on the podcast, is attending to some work responsibilities today, but we have an amazing fill-in, Mike Hart. Mike is new to Play On as our athletics program advisor, but he's got a long history as an athletic director, a great story himself. Mike, welcome, man. Good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be here. I've spent over a decade as an AD, so now I get the opportunity to work with ADs across the country. It's been a cool transition so far. Looking forward to today's conversation because I think it's something that every AD deals with, whether we realize it or not, especially this time of year. Summer's winding down. Everyone's getting back into fall sports, getting ready to start, and getting a lot of questions from parents and families. So I think today's conversation's timely.
Yeah, it's been a minute or two since our last episode, but school's starting up. I know it's August 6th when we're recording this, and I know school has started in parts of the country already, which is crazy to me, being in the Northeast here. But it's that time. I know sports have pretty much started everywhere for sure, and ADs never get enough time off, so kind of time to dig in and get things going. This is an interesting one, right? Like, I think the way we'd say it is that what Steven's going to talk about today is something that every athletic director deals with, but maybe doesn't really put a name to the issues that surround it, which is kind of like helping families navigate the transition to school or education-based sports, middle school sports, high school sports. There's a pretty big jump or transition from youth sports, club sports, rec sports, travel sports to education-based athletics. And there's some friction that comes with it, and kind of pretty excited to talk to Steven about that. Before we jump in with Steven, Mike, any thoughts there?
No, I think that's great. I'm excited to hear what Steven has to say. I think, fall sports starting across the country, it's in the full swing, and there's just a huge transition between middle school and high school sports, and whether that's club sports to high school sports, middle school booster clubs to high school sports, or middle school sponsored sports. There's all different types of middle school sports that are out there. And no matter what path you were on, it's still a huge transition. And no one's really ready for it until you get there.
Yeah, agreed. And so Steven Anderson is an athletic director at Providence Academy in Green Bay, Wisconsin, doing some really great work, and he's the creator of the Rising Athlete Project, including the Rising Freshman Field Guide, which is a resource that was built to help parents, school leaders, and athletic departments, as well as athletes, navigate the move into middle school, high school sports. So Steven, without further ado, welcome, man. Great to have you.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here. It's a topic I've been thinking about from a lot of different seats. So I'm an athletic director at a 4K through 12th grade school. So I kind of see the end-to-end journey there. I'm a PE teacher, coached a lot of teams, parent of 4 kids as well. So I think a lot of, athletic directors are dealing with these same issues. And like you said, they're not always something that's named clearly or cleanly, but something important to talk about for sure. Because I think if we can be proactive in addressing some of this, then we're not dealing with the reactive problems from parents.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more. I like that proactive versus reactive thing is real, and it's hard for athletic directors to always be out in front of everything, but I think what you're doing helps both athletic directors, parents, again, be proactive, which is really, really helpful. So just give us a little bit more background about Rising Athlete Project. Like, why did you start it? What is it that you set out to build? How's that going?
Yeah, it's Rising Athlete Project came out of real conversations that I was having all the time as an athletic director. Been in almost a decade now, and like I said, kind of end-to-end journey. So I'm seeing kids, coming into the school year. I've seen kids go from 4th through 12th grade across our team sports spectrum, and so I kept finding myself in these hallway conversations, or on the sideline, or in the bleachers, parent meetings, what have you. all with families trying to kind of make sense of the new stage of sports that they're entering. And, sometimes there's playing time issues, communication issues, whatever it is. It just seemed like those quick conversations weren't enough. So I really wanted to create the resource I kind of wish I had for a lot of those conversations. Some of my background's also in communications, journalism, and marketing. And so I thought, what better way to kind of bring these two worlds together where, boots on the ground athletics administration experience with some of those, communication skill sets and combining them into the Rising Athlete Project. Again, really just to, be more proactive about these conversations, give parents, and ideally athletic directors too, something in their arsenal that they can, talk about and give to families, rather than, having to wait for that conflict conversation, after it escalates from a coach. So something to just get in families' hands, and this is the perfect time of year to do it going into the school year. And so excited to see where kind of this project takes me, and hopefully where we can help families along the way.
I love that. I can't wait to hear some like examples and some of the specifics that you're working on, because like my mind is like just going in 15 different directions about story after story after story where something like this project would have probably been helpful, and I probably didn't think enough about it proactively. I had lots of answers reactively, but and lots of stories centered around it. So I think that's a great place to start, and I'm glad you're working on this. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think a lot of ADs have those hallway conversations and they start to become those repetitive, you're answering the same question. So, Stephen, what made you first realize that with so many parent frustrations that they were really transition issues rather than conflicts? Was there a particular conversation or a specific experience that just clicked for you?
Yeah, it wasn't just like a light bulb moment for sure. It was definitely, you mentioned the repetition. I mean, a lot of athletic directors have the same conversation over and over. It feels like Groundhog Day sometimes. And you're like, man, if I could just get out in front of this. I think during a typical high school tenure of 4 years, you'll sometimes have those same families that kind of keep coming up with, a minor issue here, a minor issue there. And, sometimes they graduate and on to the next, so it's something where if we can get ahead of it and help families, even though it's a short 4 year window, I think it can be so helpful, make those 4 years, a super positive experience. And obviously if families have, more than one child, then they're probably having another one coming on through. And so if we can head off some of the same issues, it just seemed like, the playing time conversation or confusion with communication with a coach, or especially coming into high school sports. Obviously we're in education-based athletics trying to, help high schoolers, prepare to enter adulthood in the real world. And so there's this transition that takes place from the kind of the parent handling, the communication issues for their kid in elementary and middle school sports. And now all of a sudden they're thrust into the situation of, I got to interact directly with my coach and work this out face to face. And some of them are not, ready for that. You combine that with, just coming from 8th grade where maybe they were one of the top players on the team, and now all of a sudden they're fighting for a JV roster spot, and it's just a rude awakening. And so not only can the student athlete end up just second guessing themselves, parents do as well, and then conflicts arise from that. So like I said, it wasn't just one moment, it was just the repetition of those things. And I'm like, if I can just start to get out in front of this, and then hopefully we're not dealing with conflict, and we're instead dealing with strategy and perspective, with wisdom.
That's so true. I think every single athletic director has had those exact situations happen. And I think the biggest thing that I've always advocated when I was an athletic director is your child can advocate for themselves and should be advocating for themselves because they're in high school. And 90% of the issues that come up can be resolved with just the athlete having a conversation with the coach. But it's getting them to that point. And I think that's kind of what you're going to go into a little bit more in depth about.
I agree with you, Mike. There's that fine line, right, between a parent having a 14 or 15-year-old kid who, number one, they've been their coach maybe for a long time. Obviously, they're their parents, and like sort of turning over some of the responsibility to both themselves as well as to the school and the coaches. Like that's a hard transition, I think, for a lot of families. And getting out in front of it and having the right conversations becomes really important because what you said rings true, right? Like most of the time, a coach can work it out with a kid themselves. And sometimes when the parents get involved, it creates another layer that makes the situation really hard for the coach to reconcile for lots of different reasons. Like one quick come to my mind, like parent complaining about playing time. And as an AD, you're kind of like, they'll come to the AD and just like, well, if the coach all of a sudden starts giving your kid more playing time, you're going to go out and you're going to tell every other parent that I met with the athletic director and now my kid's playing more. And now Scott, as the AD, has every parent at their door every day saying my kid deserves more playing time. And if they don't get more playing time or if they get less playing time, then it's like retribution. The coach is upset because I came and talked to the athletic director. So, man, it just goes on and on. So, Steve, walk us through what actually changes from your perspective, families once they move into school sports, like commitment, roles, competition, communication, all things you talked about. Like, what actually shifts and what often catches families off guards?
Yes, I think, school sports just become less individual. A lot of community, rec sports, club sports, families are really thinking about what is my child going to do? What's their role going to be? And then in school sports, you're entering a system, a program. I mean, it could be, larger schools are going to, of course, have JV1, JV2, freshman level teams, and you have to figure out that structure of moving across that in a cohesive and efficient way. And I think a lot of families just don't know how that process works, and it's going to be different at each school and school size. Some smaller rural schools, you might have a freshman who's going to be thrust into a varsity scenario. That's a rude awakening of its own for sure. But just the roles on the team, you're suddenly as a freshman navigating potentially playing time dynamics with a 17, 18-year-old junior, senior. And so the competition level certainly goes up, not just externally, but internally within the program. So players are trying to fit into a broader system that they don't quite understand yet, and parents as well. So I mean, maybe they've seen the high school sports results in the local media or things like that, but they haven't experienced it from a parent angle. And so it's just a bigger system that they're part of, and it really just can catch families off guard. That I've just seen a lot of families that expect it to just be like maybe a slight notch up from middle school sports, and now all of a sudden they're dealing with eligibility issues. State associations are going to handle a lot of those things differently as well, but obviously NIL and things like that are coming into the picture too. So there's just a lot of things that weren't on the radar before and suddenly are.
Now, we certainly want anybody listening to go ahead and contact you and the project and download a lot of the resources that I've seen on your site. But give me a practical example in terms of like an answer to one of the issues that you just said. Like, what are you providing through the project to a parent? How do they see that themselves?
Yeah, so there's it's really about providing guidance on the front end. So I think a lot of athletic directors, we view like a parent meeting at the beginning of the season, as an opportunity to share, here's what the athletic handbook says, make sure you get your athletic physicals in, things like that. But we're not talking through, how our school handles varsity and JV dynamics, how playing time, looks and things like that. So I think being able to get in front of that, the playing time issue, just because you mentioned it, Scott, too, it can snowball in so many different directions. So that's certainly one that I've learned to head off a little bit better early on in my journey. It is kind of entertaining those conversations in a way that leads to those rumors or second guessing or gossip around the program or whatever. And so if an athletic director or a coach can meet with families and lay out the expectations beforehand, then everybody can refer back to that conversation, rather than figuring it out as they go, and usually that doesn't end very well, and there's conflict involved. But if you can just say, here is our exact playing time philosophy, get that alignment with coaches beforehand, and roll that out to families. They may not agree with the decision made about their child, but they can at least understand where you're coming from with it.
No, I appreciate that. And playing time, never an issue, I know. So, one of the ones that sticks out to me, when I was an athletic director, I wasn't used to middle school sports the way I grew up and like participated. And then where I was working had middle school teams, and it took me a little bit to realize it was the toughest team in the entire district to make. We had one team for 3 grades in the middle school, and so you making that team was pretty much harder than making any other, like once they got to the high school. And that was something I really needed to communicate to parents at some point and kids, because they would get dismayed, right? Like, I got cut from the middle school team, I didn't make the team, and we wanted to make sure they didn't just shut down. Like, I'm a sixth grader, you playing against kids 2 years older and being only one team in the school at that age, really hard. So that was one practical example I thought of when I was looking at your stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. If I can piggyback off that, I think it's really important for a high school athletic director to understand the middle school ecosystem that they have within their district. Because it could be a more competitive dynamic, or it could be there's a bunch of different elementary, middle schools feeding into one large high school. And the competition level changes that way. So yeah, an athletic director is not just living on an island with their high school. They have to understand where their kids are coming from, so they can better understand how to address the parent scenarios. There's just so many different things about middle school sports that are complicated, that still continue on into high school sports. Obviously just puberty and child development. It's just such a big one. Obviously there's late bloomers who they're not going to hit their stride until freshman, sophomore year. And, if they've been dismissed as, somebody who's not going to make the team, we might be missing out on giving a child an opportunity that they could have had to excel. So we just have to help parents understand, the bigger picture, in relation to child development as well.
Absolutely.
You brought up the parent meetings, and I think so many ADs just view that as a check the box because you're required to do it, but don't spend the extra few minutes to take and explain processes and things. And I think that's a great point. So you've been in multiple chairs, Stephen. You are a parent, you've coached, you're an athletic director. From the AD's chair, where do you see these transition issues show up the most? Is it with parents, athletes, or is it with coaches just trying to manage the expectations?
Yeah, it's honestly all three and like the collision points of them. So parents feel it because they're trying to understand, what's happening, with their child, something they haven't navigated before. Athletes are feeling it because they're trying to understand, where they fit. And again, they haven't seen it before at the school context. Coaches, feel it if they're, experienced at the high school level. They may start to sense some trends, through the years. But I've had a high school coach who's, been doing it a long time, and now he takes, seriously kind of that education of the freshmen coming in particular, to lay out those expectations, because when they're dealing with a kid coming from 8th grade who doesn't know how the playing time situation works, just to keep coming back to that, it's just going to create frustration. All of a sudden you look down the bench and that 9th grader is just, hanging their head, and they don't understand why things are happening the way they are, and they can often internalize that as like, where did I mess up? What did I do wrong? When really that's exactly how high school sports often works. You're back to the bottom rung on the ladder, and put in the time, show the effort, be coachable as a player, and those are the kind of things that are going to earn your way, and it'll come to fruition a little bit more, obviously, each year moving forward. With it being a 4-year journey, even in middle school sports, maybe it was a 3-year journey if you're at a 6th through 8th grade middle school, but some are just 7th, 8th grade, and so they went from that beginning of the journey in 7th grade, and then all of a sudden they're a captain on the team in 8th. Well, it doesn't work that way in high school. It's a more prolonged process across those years. So yeah, it's the transition issues really are the collision points of each stakeholder in the process, trying to navigate it from their perspective, and then there's just a lot of questions that emerge from that. So I mean, again, players often quit sports if they have a bad first experience in ninth grade. They drop out and they're like, I don't belong. I'm done. And then we lose so much in that process if we can keep kids engaged. Parents are thinking, is my child okay? Is this fair? Should I step in? And coaches are trying to get ahead of all these issues, navigating that relationship with coach and child.
Yeah, I think the parents also, it's a huge adjustment for them if they're coming from middle school to high school, because your kid may have been the best kid on the team in the middle school. And then you're going up against 16, 17, 18-year-old juniors and seniors, and it's just a huge adjustment. And they need to take time to reflect on that as well, and really take a step back and look at the big picture and understand, like, my kid is going to the bottom again, and that's okay. That's a
Yeah.
part of sports.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just extend off that, I think in education-based athletics, a lot of times we're thinking about educating the students, and rightfully so. But really, we're educating parents in their journey as well. And as athletic directors, I think we have to recognize, the education responsibility extends to more than just the kids.
I believe that. It makes me think about an ice hockey story I'll share with you guys. Had ice hockey at my school. If you know anything about ice hockey, parents are like, I won't use the word crazy, but they're so invested, and it's such a commitment that I remember canceling some stuff for ice hockey. Like, it's snowing outside, there's 2 inches of snow on the ground, school's not in session. I'm like, I got to cancel practice today or cancel a game. Parents calling me up of incoming freshmen. What are you like? Are you out of your mind? I drive through 2 feet of snow at 5 in the morning to get to hockey tournaments. There's 2 inches on the ground and you're canceling? Like, I got to remind them the kids are on a yellow school bus, that this is education based athletics and not like double A hockey, right? But not something that they thought about. They weren't trying to be mean. They're just like, how can this happen? And what a difference between like a club ice hockey sport and a high school ice hockey sport. So that stuff is real. So what's one story, Stephen, that sticks with you? Like a moment where a family or an athlete really struggled with this transition and then something shifted once they had a clear framework that you provide.
Yeah, so I'll keep the details a little vague to protect the innocent. I mean, they could be listening to this podcast for all I know, but
I
there's
hope
a
they're
family.
listening.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. This would be helpful for them. But there's one family that there was just semi-regular minor issues throughout elementary and middle school sports. And again, because I see the whole spectrum, I certain families kind of come on your radar as like, let's pay attention here, see if this is going to become something. You just sometimes can feel that with certain families by their demeanor in the stands or whatever it may be. Nothing is really blown up yet, but you sense a potential there. And then knowing that the high school transition is coming, in that particular example, I took it up upon myself to meet with that family individually and not as a, lay down the law type of meeting, but really like let's talk through what this transition to high school sports is going to look like. So just talking to both the parents, individually, knowing that this was a family that, has struggled with, how they handled themselves at games, different conflicts with coaches through the years, and again, didn't want it to be punitive, but knowing that the next 4 years could either be an unfortunate extension of the experience it already had, or it could be a shift. And, we had that conversation, and obviously, parent personality and things like that are going to be what they're going to be at some level, but boy, that conversation definitely changed the tone in the room, and even at at the gym, I could see certain moments in a game where this would normally have been some kind of outburst at a referee or something, and they're kind of reining each other in the stands, and kind of give a little side eye over, like I saw that you were struggling with that, but you didn't blow up this time, and so really just having the relationship with the parents. And obviously, as a high school athletic director only, it may be hard to anticipate some of those families, but that's another thing where maybe talk to the middle school athletic director, or somebody else in the system who, again, you don't want to pigeonhole families a certain way, but if you can just head off some of the issues, the ones where there's regular things going on. Again, just getting ahead of that is so important. So, yeah, there were a lot of coach conversations I think avoided, during the rest of that 4-year high school career, just by having that 30-minute conversation. So I think any athletic director would trade 30 minutes of time with one family for 4 years of potential conflict.
Sounds like good math to me, for sure. You know what stuck out to me in that? And I'm gonna think I was in charge of high school and middle school athletics, so maybe not as important, but like the idea of articulation, right? We would have our high school social studies teachers articulate or meet with the middle school social studies teachers to make sure that there was like this nice flow between the middle school classes and the high school classes and that was being taught and style. And yet there wasn't a ton of articulation between our coaches always, or the athletic director. Let's say if there was a separate one at a middle school, or maybe there was 4 middle schools, right, of kids coming into your high school, and like just that articulation or conversation probably could have helped a whole bunch. So like I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I think there's a co-curricular element. A lot of times we think of sports as extracurricular, but we like to think of them as co-curricular. It fits in with what we're doing in the school, and like you said, I think there's a lot of systems that the student dean and the principals and things like that have worked through, that if we could just adopt that within athletics, we'd probably have a more cohesive program.
Great.
Well, while I was an AD, we had a great relationship with our middle school, and the programs crossover were well. But I was close with our middle school principal and athletic director, and having meetings with them throughout the school year in constant open line of communication. So who those parents and athletes may be, and then you start at the very start, paying them a little extra attention, and making them on your radar rather than it become a bigger issue down the road. So I think all that was great. So, but for an AD listening who has no formal resources like you have right now, what is some low lift ways that could start setting clear expectations with incoming families? Something
Yeah,
around.
yeah, it could be, looking at the athletic handbook. Now that's something where, our family's going to read it as in depth. Every family is going to be different on that, but certainly documenting, expectations on areas like playing time and things like that. So families can again have a reference point. Now is obviously the time of year when a lot of back to school meetings and things like that are happening. So it could be kind of identifying those few families you want to have those conversations with. Obviously, you can't meet with hundreds of families individually, but if it's pick out a few, and that can help change a culture, right there. And then just try to find ways to weave it into that, preseason parent meeting some way, somehow. It could be in the email follow-up, you stress it. It could be, just as you're going through, different, policies or how the school year is going to go. Every athletic director has, a change or two that they're going to introduce, whether it's, with an athletic training provider or whatever it may be. Just rolling these out and saying that, hey, we're trying to equip you as families to handle, these next 4 years, smoothly. So I think just putting a name to something that's usually kind of understated, in those meetings, in those emails, it certainly could be providing them, a resource like mine. But at the end of the day, just being intentional about the parent education piece as it relates to preparation rather than reactivity.
I think it's great. There's not, you're not looking at starting this huge drawn out initiative that's time consuming. It's just little things that you can put in place, having those conversations early rather than later, that can really solve those. So I think all that was great.
And then even with coaches too, I mean, I think, we meet preseason with coaches and things like that, laying out, some of these same expectations. So they're anticipating, if they do run into a certain issue, here's how to handle it, rather than maybe letting it escalate through, back and forth conversations and emails that start getting out of control, and then it comes to the AD's desk.
And in those preseason coaches meetings, I've always enjoyed when coaches got to connect with one another to make sure that everyone's aligned and is handling things the same way. And then letting coaches rely on their peers and other coaches to say, like, they need to be comfortable to say, like, hey, I'm having this issue. Like, what have you done in the past? So it doesn't necessarily have to go through the AD, but it can go through the coach. I think that's a great option as well.
Again, thinking about real life stuff, I think a lot of parents don't always realize that it is truly education-based athletics when they've come from maybe a club sport where it's win at all costs kind of thing, and yet we're also trying to win games but educate at the same time, or we might have lower level teams that have a different approach to like winning versus helping kids grow and get better, and the idea that you're either going to be at your public school or you may wind up at a private school, but there's just not as many options, right? Sometimes you see kids and parents bounce around from club team until they find what they think is their right fit. But you come into a school and it's like this, you got to also help make it fit, right? You've got to give in a little bit to fit into what we're doing. We want to do the same from school-based athletics, but like they got to kind of conform sometimes. There's just not as many options, right? To go somewhere else or throw some dollars at it to go pay to play for somebody else. So I think that's for real. Um, Stephen, I feel like we're talking a lot about parents and coaches. I want to focus on the kids and the student athletes for a minute and just think about like what's the difference? Do you have any real practical advice or situations where you deal with the student athletes differently? What does that look like as compared to like when you're dealing with the adults?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of times we're so busy trying to focus on the adult issues that we can forget about the kids in the process, and which is completely backwards, obviously, of how it should be. Everything should be designed around helping the student athlete grow and learn. So I think there's a lot of growing movement in our athletic administration space around, student athlete leadership teams. We call it SALT in the state of Wisconsin. And, the WIA is starting to encourage, things like that. And actually, for the first time, we just had a high school student athlete leadership camp at the beginning of this summer. And it really gave an opportunity to, bring the kids together. And, we coincided it with preparation for some of our youth camps. So we have our high schoolers help out with the youth athletes, and so we're helping them think through, okay, if you got a crying kid over there, what are you going to do? And just very, very tactical and practical situations that they would encounter. And so in the context of discussing those things, we're also discussing how can we improve our culture. And a lot of it was me, and I had some coaches in the room too, and we're having just small group breakout discussions with the student athletes of what would you like to see, what would help you, what are you struggling with, what do you wish you knew as a freshman. And so I think just bringing them into the conversation, showing them they're valued, they're not just being dictated to by a coach or an athletic director or their parent for that matter. Now we're starting to treat them as young adults, which they are, and we want them to be part of being the solution that they want to see, I guess you could say. And so I think there's student athlete leadership teams, I think, are a big opportunity. I'm planning to do more of that this coming school year. Bringing the student athletes together every other week and just a session, and we're gonna have different I guess it'd be the equivalent of professional development type topics, within a school context. Could be culture one week, could be, student, fan sections. How do we handle that? Things like that. But yeah, just getting the students part of the discussion is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think part of my goal as an athletic director when I was an AD was everything should center around the student. And if we're not listening to what the kids have to say, then we're not doing a good enough job. Um, so I think all that was great, and love the advisory council, the salts. I started my school when I was there for the last 2 years, and it's really grown. It's been great. Looking ahead, how do you see the conversation around athlete and family transition evolving? Do you think this is becoming a formal part of athletic administration?
Yeah, I think really we just have to think about parent education kind of in its own bucket, and rather than viewing it as something that comes up. We don't want conflict to be the way we view our relationship with parents, or really it should be this is a mutually beneficial opportunity to engage with each other. We're on the same team. Obviously, the parent wants what's best for the kid. We want what's best for the student athlete, and coming together to make that happen is super important. So we're already doing parent education, I think, as athletic directors. We might just not be thinking of it in that formalized term. So every preseason meeting is parent education. The handbook functions that way. We email a lot as athletic directors. Each of those communication pieces is parent education in some way. And then just those sideline conversations. I know as athletic directors, sometimes we're bouncing from the scores table to the stands, or the checking on the concession stand, or checking security, making sure everything's good there. But we're bumping into parents all kinds of different ways, and we can either be kind of withdrawn, and the guy that's looks like they've got 10 different things on their plate and not wanting to talk to somebody, or really looking for the proactive conversation with parents, just checking in. How are you experiencing the season so far, and those kind of conversations. So I do think it needs to be a more formal part of athletic administration. Not that we need another hat to wear amidst the 100 we already have on, but certainly it's integrated with a lot of the things we already do as athletic directors. And again, it's preventative maintenance rather than reactive situations. So putting that planting that small seed on the front end can really save a lot of headaches later.
Well, Stephen, I really love what you're doing, and how you're getting out in front of things. I think it comes down to that old statement of like measure twice and cut once. And I think if you're being thoughtful about this prior, if you have the resources in front of you and you're doing a great job with those resources, it can really save you from making a mistake, and it can really help provide a much better, more comprehensive, smoother transition and full athletic program. So I really appreciate what you're doing, man. I think it's great. I hope some people will check out the website. You want to just do a quick plug for the website right now and make sure everybody has that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the opportunity. It's risingathleteproject.com. I've got the field guides, which are pretty comprehensive, about each transition level, including the coming into the freshman year. I've got some free downloads that parents can access, or athletic directors as well, to, a high school readiness checklist. I've got some for middle school, and then for youth sports as well. And then I've got a newsletter on there as well, which would be a great, opportunity for, athletic directors and parents to connect. I've got a fall lead-in series that I'm going through right now too. So really just equipping, parents ahead of when they'll need it, and athletic directors too. So risingathleteproject.com.
Stephen, thanks again for joining us. One thing that really stood out to me, that we face so many challenges as ADs, and they're not always about conflict. It could be more about clarity. The more we help families understand what to expect before their season starts, the better experience everyone has, from the student all the way up to the administration staff. And I think every AD listening today can take away at least one idea that we talked about and put into practice this fall. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
That's all we ask for, right? Is one good idea. making sure athletic directors know they don't have to reinvent the wheel themselves. There's a lot of good people and resources out there, and this is certainly one of them. So if everybody listening likes what you heard, make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss any new episodes from AD360. Wishing everybody a really strong start to the athletic season here and a great school year. So from AD360, I am Scott Rosenberg.
And I'm Mike Hart. Thanks for listening, and good luck as you kick off another school year. We'll see you next time.